What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I wanted to talk about the potential of weapon customization in Battlefield 2042 and essentially my hopes for how it might play out. So far we haven't learned too much about the customization in the game. They did mention a little bit at the initial reveal for the game, and then obviously they mentioned the plus system which plays into it as well, but that's pretty much the extent of what we know right now, so I'm definitely excited to hear more or even see more closer to the launch of the game. Weapon customization in Call of Duty has definitely set the standard for how many games are going to be operating in the future. The sheer amount of options they allow in the gunsmith in the two most recent games has definitely been pretty awesome to see, and I think it adds a bit of depth to the game, which is kind of weird to be talking about depth in the same sentence as Call of Duty, but here we are. And so anyway, I think a lot of games are going to be following suit, because when the biggest shooter in the industry does something like that, it just kind of raises the standards a little bit, and a lot of people really expect that level of control moving forward. Now, with that being said, as much as I love the gunsmith in Warzone, I do think that there's actually some level of wasted content there in a way, because that game is so heavily built around the meta loadouts, and with most assault rifles having, say, 50 to 70 attachment options, there's at least 45 attachments that people just literally never use, because there's just those 5 to 7 attachments that are essentially a must-have, and for me it does make all of those other attachments feel like a bit of a waste of time for the developers. One thing that I really hope they can do properly in Battlefield 2042 is just figuring out the balancing. It's always going to be pretty hard to do, and I think most shooters will never be 100% balanced, because some weapons are always just going to be slightly better than others, but I think if they can make the game really balanced in that area, that will remove the issue of having meta loadouts, and therefore if there are plenty of attachments like there were in Battlefield 4, they will all be useful in one way or another. The way that the weapon customization worked in Battlefield 4 was honestly so good in my opinion. It felt like each attachment actually had a reason to be used, and they all seemed to be fairly even in terms of the pros and cons for the most part. Sure, there were some weapons in that game and even some attachments that were pretty much the meta, but I thought they allowed a heap of customization while not really rendering half the attachments useless like they are in Warzone. Taking the suppressors in Warzone as an example, there's always two options, and the one that you unlock later is always just objectively better than the first one. Now, that does make sense. Obviously, the attachments you unlock later on should be better than the earlier ones, but it feels like they're better in literally every category, whereas if I were looking to balance out the attachments, I feel like the early suppressor needs to at least have something more useful than the last one. Otherwise, why is that even in the game? I'm never ever going to use that again if I unlock the better version. They tend to say on the stats screen that they do have, one area that is slightly better, maybe a faster ADS speed or whatever, so on paper they do stick to that same theory, but when you actually use them, there is just literally no logical reason to use the worst one. I really hope that in Battlefield 2042 they kind of eradicate this issue by having different attachments rather than better attachments. In my opinion, each attachment should be as good as the next one, but for its own situation or its own playstyle, so they still have reasons as to why you should use each one, and depending on your playstyle you might still only use one suppressor, but that other suppressor should still be useful for someone who plays the game differently than you do. In Warzone, it honestly just doesn't even matter whether you're aggressive or passive, whether you're using an LMG or an SMG, everyone just uses the mono suppressor, and therefore it just kind of renders the other attachments completely useless, and at the end of the day, even though the gunsmith in that game is awesome, there may as well just be 10 attachments in the game rather than 70, so I think the gunsmith actually seems better than it is, if that makes sense. I think they've made a great decision in 2042 by only allowing 4 different attachment slots, those being the barrel, underbarrel, sight and ammunition, but that doesn't mean that it's going to be better right away. They do still need to make sure that each attachment is balanced, and they really do have proper pros and cons, because otherwise we could just end up in the same situation as Call of Duty. I think the plus system will be huge for this though, because it's almost like we get to bring multiple loadouts with us, and I think in a way that will almost force players to actually use a few different attachments in each slot, or at least be losing out if they aren't doing that. Maybe there's one really good ammo type that everyone uses, but if you can just switch between them mid-game, then the other ammo types might come into play a bit more often, and therefore that really good ammo type that everyone uses actually becomes less dominant or less regular, I guess. Therefore, there kind of isn't as much of a meta as there would be if we were only allowed one attachment. There might still be meta loadouts, for example, rather than having just the best 4 attachments, people will consistently bring the 12 best attachments using the 3 best for each slot and just rotating through those attachments depending on their situation. And while technically that is still resulting in a meta loadout of sorts, I just think it doesn't feel like as much of a must for the players. Everyone might have the same 12 attachments that they can cycle through, but in any given gunfight, I might have quickly changed my attachments to sort of give me a slight edge in that gunfight, but then maybe right after that I get killed by another guy who had his weapon set up better for a range that mine just wasn't set up for. So I think the plus system really will help to sort of alleviate this issue that we've come to know in Warzone. After everything that DICE and Ripple Effect have shown us so far with the initial reveal and then Portal now as well, everything in this this game looks absolutely amazing, so it feels like the only real place it can go wrong is in the balancing and just the overall state of the gameplay, and I think the weapon and attachment balancing is definitely at the forefront of that. If they can nail the balancing and reduce any bugs or any game-breaking issues, this game is seriously set up to be one of the best Battlefield experiences, if not one of the best first-person shooter experiences that we've ever seen before. And so I really do hope that they make the balancing a priority, and like I said, I think a great place for them to start is to make all the attachments feel viable depending on everyone's playstyle. If every single player is shoehorned into using the best weapons in the same set of attachments, it'll likely end in the game getting stale after a pretty short period of time, and it also just makes it feel so much sweatier and more frustrating when everyone has to use the same gun. But if they can make it so that pretty much any gun is viable so long as you actually know when and where to use it, that just adds so much replayability to the game, and I think it just sort of brings it back to that fun, casual feeling that we know and love from the Battlefield franchise. Let me know what you guys think down below, whether you agree or disagree. If you enjoyed the video, then be sure to leave a like down below, and if you are new, then consider subscribing to the channel with those notifications on. If you guys want to support the content that I make here on YouTube, then consider becoming a channel member. But with that being said, guys, thank you all very much for watching. You guys have a great day, and I'll see you all out there on the battlefield.